This is ogforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered, independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention three things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Paya. Paya offers Acumatica users a suite of industry-leading payment orchestration tools. Far beyond native Acumatica payments, Paya enables EMV NFC terminals for countersale. They offer a frictionless customer portal through their click-to-pay solution, and they support most e-commerce platforms and point-of-sale solutions used with Acumatica, such as One Retail and AcuPOS. And best of all, omni-channel reconciliation is available for all their solutions. Our second sponsor is DataSelf. DataSelf Analytics is a revolutionary reporting solution that enables organizations to make the most informed decisions faster and easier than ever. It uniquely simplifies business intelligence, empowers anyone to build and access dashboards, and delivers critical business insight when and where you need it. Our third sponsor is Aldrich Web Solutions. Are you a distributor using Acumatica, yet struggling with an e-commerce fit? US-based Aldrich Web Solutions out of Marion, Illinois, has 2 decades of experience helping distributors find success online. Our team of experts built the integration, creating websites that work effortlessly with Acumatica. With our reputation for swift customer service and meticulous attention to detail, we are the perfect fit for distributors needing online solutions. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. The second thing I'd like to mention is that I'm always looking for victims. I mean guests. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn more about being a guest on the podcast. Third and finally, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out augforums.com/Rolodex to find out who else is using Acumatica and read the instructions at the top to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Friday, February 23rd, 2024, and this is episode number 127. You can find related links on the episode page at augforums.com/episode 127. Today I'm talking with Paul Mainard about ERP lessons learned from climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Hey, Paul, thanks for joining us today.
Tim, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's always nice to talk shop with you. You somebody I respect and admire in the channel. So yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, hey, before we get to Mount Kilimanjaro, I always like to start with the brief origin story of all of our guests. Maybe you could tell us where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you landed in the world of mid-market ERP.
How much time do we have? We'll try to keep this one brief. Story of origin. So I was born in San Francisco at the University of California in San Francisco. It was kind of an interesting story there, as I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and all 4 of us were not only born in the same hospital, but in the same room. So that's kind of an interesting tidbit. So I grew up in the Bay Area. I had spent a lot of time in the East Bay, grew up a Oakland A's, Oakland Raiders fan, and I even went to college in the East Bay, what is now known as Cal State University East Bay. Back in the day, it was Cal State University Hayward. So shout out to all of my Pioneer alums. Yeah, so how did I get into ERP? It's an interesting question. So my career kind of took me. I'm a recovering CPA. When I graduated from school, I went to work at Ernst and Young in Silicon Valley. That stint was kind of short lived. I After I made it through the first busy season, they had a big riff, and so I was one of the victims of about a 15% cut in workforce, and eventually found myself into a controller role, worked for an entertainment software company, and then went back into public accounting, kind of managing accounting services. Did a lot of QuickBooks stuff, back in the day, and I've kind of found myself gravitating to the ERP space. I think I was more interested in the technology than I was in accounting, and so I found myself, looking, finding an opportunity working for a company called Dexter and Cheney, which is now part of Trimble. So I was doing ERP training and implementations in the construction industry, and found myself involved with Acumatica in early 2010, which is around the time that they launched their product. So, I was hired by a company called Parallels to basically do a worldwide implementation. Parallels was basically a software conglomerate with operations throughout the world. And so I got to travel the world to implement Acumatica, probably one of the first ones ever, particularly one that was going to be multinational, multi-currency, et cetera. So I learned at the feet of Mike Shilkanagoff. I've known he and Doug Johnson pretty much since then. So it's been an
I
interesting
didn't
journey.
realize that because Mike C created Acumatica while at Parallels, right?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah.
Ah,
So Mike C, so what they basically, for anyone who knows the story, and I don't want to tell it on his behalf. I'm sure that he could tell it better than I can. But Mike C had worked on way back in the day. They had worked on converting Solomon to SQL, which I think was like version 3 or something like that. And so yeah, they and I think that experience was like, well, I could do this. And so so they did. They created Acumatica, and so in
I
parallel
knew
came.
you went way back with Acumatica. I didn't know you went that far back. That's
I did.
interesting.
I did. Yeah, yeah. It's been an interesting journey, and I've certainly seen the platform evolve over those 14 years. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it, and more specifically, how I got involved with Acumatica, people will say, well, Paul's, probably one of the first consultants, and that's open to debate. I don't know. I mean, I was one of the first, but I certainly wasn't the first. But I'm sure I did, a pretty good size one, with that had a big footprint. So.
Very cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I didn't even. I love doing this podcast because you always pick up things that you weren't expecting. We're here to
Yeah.
talk about Mount Kilimanjaro, and I found out you were on the parallels. I forgot about that. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was good. And I mean, talk about a learning experience too. It was a pretty sharp learning curve, and so.
Yeah, and I'm sure the product was extremely buggy back then, and it was probably a bumpy ride, I would imagine, or maybe not. I don't know.
I don't know about buggy. A lot of undocumented features, maybe, would be the way to put that.
That's another way of saying it. Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, we were chatting a little bit ago, and you were telling me about this Mount Kilimanjaro climbing experience you had, and how you were thinking of comparisons to ERP, and it reminded me of a episode I did of comparing grief to an ERP implementation. I thought it'd be fun to hear your thoughts. I know you have kind of been bouncing around for a while, and I don't even remember when did you climb Mount Kilimanjaro? How long ago was it?
Yeah. So that would have been the end of May, early June 2018. And so, yeah, this idea has been rattling around in this brain of mine for, gosh, now it's been 6 years, which, thank you for that. I thought I couldn't feel any older than I do right now. By the way, before we get started, I just want to make sure too that, in full disclosure for those who follow me on LinkedIn or whatever, that I am speaking for myself and not my employer. So I want to get that out there. So so we do this, yeah. So it was 2016. I had this or 2018, I should say. I had this experience. And yeah, we're hiking to the top of Kilimanjaro, and I was just kind of, as you do, maybe give you a little background. The day of summit, and I should say the night of summit, you get up in the middle of the night, and they put some food in you. You get dressed up because it's super cold. You're starting at about 15,000, vertical feet, and you got to get up to 19,000 vertical feet. 19,341, I believe, is the exact height of or a peak. And so you get out and you're walking in the dark and it's cold, and there's not a lot of stimuli other than cold, right? And being out of breath, and so your mind begins to sort of wander. And as I was doing it, I was thinking, well, this is really hard. And I started to take stock of all the hard things that I had to do in my life, right? So you might start with something along the lines of, oh yeah, writing that first term paper was kind of hard. Graduating from college was kind of hard. Passing the CPA exam was kind of hard. Um, and then first audit. And then I landed on, first ERP implementation I ever did was super hard, because until you've actually like done one, and you're learning the platform as you're doing it. You find that it's really hard, and that got me to thinking like, well, gosh, climbing Kilimanjaro and doing an ERP, they're kind of similar. And so I began to sort of think about ways in which they are similar, and that kind of got me onto this concept of, yeah, it is a bit like, doing an ERP implementation is kind of like climbing a mountain, or at least hiking it anyway. So
Interesting. I mean, I guess I'll mention. It looks like Kilimanjaro is it in Tanzania?
Tanzania, yeah, it's in
Tanzania
Tanzania. Yeah,
on the
so
east side of Africa, and you
yeah,
said it's about 19,000 feet tall. That's a pretty good size mountain there.
Yeah, it's so a couple interesting facts about Kilimanjaro, if you'll indulge me. So, Kilimanjaro, yes, it is 19,341 feet at the top of Uhura Peak, which is the highest point in the entire continent. Kilimanjaro is also the largest freestanding mountain in the world. So, now, in terms of like highest points in the various continents, I think it's ranked like fourth or fifth. So you start with Everest and you kind of work your way through. You get down to McKinley. I think it's Kilimanjaro is shorter than McKinley, but it is a freestanding mountain. So you're not going to have it's not part of a mountain range. Is really what I'm trying to say.
Oh, interesting. And so you probably start at a lower elevation as well.
We start, yeah. So the route that we took was, I think, the floor was about 5,000 feet, and
Okay.
so yeah. So let me check my notes here real quick. I got this written down, so I want to double check that. But I want to say, yeah, it was around between 5,000 and 6,000 feet, and then you work your way up. Now, what's interesting about Kilimanjaro, I guess it's true with any mountain, really, is there's about 7 different paths that you can take to get in terms of a starting point, right? They have these various routes. Um, some take more time than others, and some are easier than others. And so the route that we took was Marangu route. And the Moringa route is also known colloquially as the Coca-Cola route because rumor has it, although I saw no evidence of this, that you can actually buy Cokes on the way up. Like there's certain stop points where there's a couple huts and whatnot where they have electricity and things of that nature. You can buy Cokes. I don't remember being able to buy a Coke when I was up there, nor was I looking really, um, but uh, but they call it that. They also call it the tourist route, and they call it the tourist route largely because it is the route that will get you to the top of the mountain fastest, right? So it's you could theoretically you could get to the top of Kilimanjaro on the Morongo route in as few as 3.5 4 days, whereas the other routes will be somewhere between 6 and 10 days. um, Now, what's interesting about this is so after I decided to kind of after I came back and was doing had this idea rattling in my brain, it causes you to do a bit of research. Not that you're not doing it before you go, but what I found was interesting is that so about 50,000 people attempt to climb to the top of Kilimanjaro every year. Okay, anywhere between 30 and 50, depends on the source that you're looking at and whatnot. And they generally have a pretty high success rate of climbing the mountain. So I got this. So let me just check my notes here. Overall success rate of making it to the top of Kilimanjaro across all routes is about 65%.
It's actually lower than I would have thought. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and we'll get into that a bit. But what's interesting is the Marangu success rate. If you take the Marangu route, which is the shorter of the seven, your success rate drops to about between 35 and 50%.
I'm starting to see the ERP tie-ins already. Very interesting.
Yes, it is very interesting, and so it does kind of send you a message, right? You when you think about it in those terms, because and one of the lessons that I've learned, we'll not go in any order. We'll just kind of shoot from the hip here. But one of the lessons that you learn is that speed is not your friend when you're trying to ascend to high altitudes in a very quick time. And the reason for that is that your body needs time to acclimate to your environment, right? So as you're going up, if you're taking the longer routes, the ascent is actually a bit slower. And it's not to say that one path is easier than the other, because they said that Morongo is actually it's kind of got kind of a moderate incline, even though you're getting there faster. Which is sort of counterintuitive. You would think that, oh well, it really isn't. The ascent isn't really fast in terms of the steepness or the incline that you're facing. It's just a shorter route. The And so what happens is yeah, over that short period of time, actually a lot of guides will suggest that, well, really what you ought to do is take an acclimation day when you're climbing Morongo. So you want to get the idea is you want to climb high, sleep low, and so they'll recommend, okay, we'll climb to this certain point, and then we'll go back to the previous camp, and you're going to spend a day at that previous camp, just to sort of allow your body to adjust.
Oh, one sec.
But
You said climb high, sleep low. Explain that more. So you actually climb high and then you backtrack?
yeah, that's
Oh,
like particularly on that route, right? So particularly on that route, because you are going up so quickly in such a short amount of time, what they want to do is they want to get you up to a higher altitude and then hike back down to the previous camp and then sleep there and then actually even spend a day, the following day, just hanging out and getting used to the higher altitude.
and what's the point of backtracking? Why not just hike to the camp and stay at the camp for a day?
Yeah, because again, because of the ascent, it's better to actually spend the time to adjust, to allow your body to adjust. The point being is that if you go up to the camp and you sleep there, and you've gone up a little too quickly, you can begin to experience high altitude sickness, which is why people fail. So so when we talk about high altitude sickness, There's two types of high altitude sicknesses. This is a nice little tie-in too. We'll touch on this a bit more. There's really two basic types of high altitude sickness. One is high altitude pulmonary edema, which is kind of an expansion of the lungs, where your lungs begin to swell. And when that happens, you can take on fluids into your lungs, which impacts your breathing. The other type of edema is cerebral edema. Again, it's your brain swelling. So I'm not a doctor, but my guess is that's not good. And
Yeah,
so,
that doesn't sound good.
yeah, yeah. Basically, if you get cerebral edema, the challenge with cerebral edema is like you begin to get confused. You can get agitated. And in severe cases, both of those conditions can kill you. And Kilimanjaro, I mean, they don't have a lot of deaths, but they do have them. They estimate that people, climbing Kilimanjaro, they have maybe about 3 in 10,000 are is what you'll experience as a death rate of people climbing Kilimanjaro.
Interesting. Yeah, I know someone who tried to climb Mount Whitney in California a couple times, and one time, but neither time they made it up, and one time they didn't make it up, not because they experienced it, but someone else. There was some guy just wandering around naked halfway up, and that must have been the cerebral kind, I would think. I mean, he was just completely out of it. So
Yeah, it can happen.
they stopped their ascent to help that person out. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it can
interesting.
happen. Yeah, I mean, our guides were telling us about situations where they had somebody that they were taking up, and he suffered from cerebral edema, and he started to attack the guides, and got kind of agitated and a bit dangerous, and he survived. They got him to hospital, but he couldn't remember anything. He didn't understand how he got in there or why, and they tried to tell him what was going on, and he was amazed. So I mean, it's all anecdotal, but that was my understanding of the type of thing that can happen when you're climbing to such high altitudes.
So
So
speed is not your friend. Is there a flip side to it? Like, is there the side of you want to maintain momentum? You don't want to camp out for a whole week and then kind of be like, oh, I don't want to go any further. Or is it
well,
mainly not going too fast?
So this is the thing, okay? And this is where, I kind of look at it from the client's perspective, right? I've hiked, I should say hiked. There's no mountaineering, skills required to get to the top of Kilimanjaro, right? It's literally just a hike. And I've done it once. So that doesn't make me an expert by any stretch, right? It's just I've experienced it. And and I think the same could be true for most end users of ERP solutions. They might go through one of these in their career. Some do it twice, but the people like you and me, we've done it several times, right? I probably do 3 or 4 a year, if not more. And so you know so the flip side, is there a flip side? Well, clearly, yes, you can't just sit on the mountain, right? That's not sustainable. And I think that in those situations, I mean, I think that, if you end up going too slow, that time, I mean, you're paying for the time of the guides, and they've got schedules that they have to meet. They're going to have, they might have other parties booked, that they're going to have to take up the following week, or they got to get home to their families, or whatever the case may be. So it's not as though you have unlimited time to climb to the top of the mountain. And I think, if you try to draw an analogy there, between the ERP and just, the taking the time, more time than you should be, I think you could basically end up with just a failed implementation, really, at the end of the day. you know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, so but on the flip side, I guess we'll focus on the speed being your enemy side.
Yeah.
You don't want to go up too fast because you're taking in maybe more than you even realize in terms of how much change is going on.
Yeah, so there, yeah, so actually, and there is kind of a nice correlation between that and the different types of edema that we're talking about, right? So one thing I would say is that with an ERP implementation, probably similar to hiking Kilimanjaro, and probably even similar to those folks who are like recreational motorcycle riders that might have a club or bicyclists or whatever, generally you can't really go faster than the slowest person, right? And in fact,
Oh, yeah, that's a good
like,
point.
like
Yeah.
with motorcycle groups, what do? They put the slowest people up front, right? Because you don't want to leave them behind. And if you're hiking Kilimanjaro, you certainly can't leave part of your party behind. You have to accommodate them, so that they have a fighting chance of making it, because you will either succeed or fail as a group for all intents and purposes. Although, they do make accommodations. Like if one person, begins to experience altitude sickness, they might one of the guides might take that one person back down and call, for a ranger to come and pick them up, or whatever, while the rest of the party goes. But generally speaking, you can't really, you don't want to leave anybody behind. So you can only go as fast as the slowest person. The other thing is
How
let's
many people were in your group, can I ask?
oh, so it was just me and my travel companion, and then the two guides.
Okay,
So
so 4 group. Okay.
yeah, and so, but we also had a whole team of people, right? We had there were porters, and there was people there to prepare our food, and to make our water drinkable, and all that stuff. So we had a whole team of folks. So you're not backpacking. Okay, you're not strapped with a backpack. They have a team of people to basically schlep all your gear to where you're going to be, and they're way ahead of you. And so they want to make it, as comfortable for you as part of it. I mean, it's kind of glamping in a way, when you think about it, right? Um, but if you think about altitude sickness, and you try to draw a parallel between that and an ERP implementation, think about a situation where you've got a really sharp learning curve, right? And you're expected to absorb and assimilate and get all that together. Well, some people can't do that all that well, or at least not very quickly. you know and so if you're doing an ERP implementation and you're just jamming it through, and maybe what you did is maybe you chose to leave some of your party behind, right? So maybe you have a couple of internal subject matter experts that are basically leading the implementation, but maybe they're not involving key people within the organization, particularly the folks that are actually doing the work, fulfilling orders, or you know creating orders, or billing customers, or taking credit card payments, or whatever that may be, manufacturing items. you know um, if they're not involved, now what do you got to do? You got to get them up to speed. You got to get them up to speed quickly. And because go live here now, it's like, okay, we're going live. Jump on. People who don't have the time to really kind of take in the information, maybe do a bit of testing, kind of getting comfortable with the software, what's going to happen? They're either going to get super stressed out, right? Pulmonary edema impacting, your respiratory system, as it were, or you're going to get overloaded with information and your brain's just going to explode. Okay, so that is that's how I was sort of like, oh man, that's beautiful. I mean, you can't explain it any better than that, in terms of that, the impact of trying to do something like an ERP implementation too quickly.
That's interesting. Yeah, so one kinda seems like an anxiety side, like the pulmonary side would be just like
Hmm.
the emotional effect of it. The other one is just more of like running into a brick wall, the cerebral side. which to me sounds more dangerous. I don't know. From the edema standpoint, are they equally dangerous, or is one worse than the
Yeah,
other?
they are. They can be. They can be. I mean, I think the cerebral piece is probably more dramatic, for the obvious reasons, right? Like you talked about the guy on Mount Whitney running around without any clothes on. That's a pretty severe case, right? And it is likely that, that kind of condition will kill you. But, it's probably not any less important than your ability to breathe without having water in your lungs.
Yeah, good. Yeah, gotcha.
And
Yeah.
that can actually put a lot of strain on your heart. So again, not a doctor, but yeah, I mean, I think that both of them are equally dangerous, for various reasons. But yeah, I think that neither of them are good for you. And if you put that into perspective of trying to retain employees who have been tenured, particularly those who've been with the same organization for a long time where they're implementing new technology, change. I mean, I look at this as like it basically speaks to the importance of change management, right? And it's not, change management isn't just training, right? But it's also getting out in front of how these changes are going to impact your team. And and designing and kind of knowing what it is that you're going to be facing as you're kind of going through this. But change management in an organization as part of your ERP implementation is super, super important. And you need to make sure that everybody is going along for the ride, right? Because you don't want to lose tenured employees over a change of technology. And so the best way to do it is to properly prepare them and give them the opportunity to acclimate to their new environment before they actually get there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm also, I could picture different types of people who get burned out in implementation. And one,
Mm.
if we continue the pulmonary versus cerebral edema analogy, the cerebral one is maybe more dramatic, like you said. It's more outward, it's more visible. It's the person who might just blow up in a meeting and be like, "This stupid software, we wish we could just go back to the old one." And at least you know what's going on, right? You know what
Right.
they're thinking. But there's also the other side where someone just totally internalizes it. They pretend like everything's going okay. And then
Right.
all of a sudden you find out they found a new job, right? Maybe that's
Yeah,
more the
they just got
pulmonary
so
side.
stressed out that they're just like, yeah, I'm done. You know, we used to call that the Kubler Ross curve of change, right? And and you do have your ups and downs. I mean, and I have to tell you, when you're trying to hike Kilimanjaro and it's in the middle of the night and it's Arctic temperatures, literally Arctic temperatures, and it's dark and you're just kind of wandering along, you begin to question whether or not you're going to be able to make it. And you have to sort of remind yourself that every step forward is progress, and you're one step closer to your goal. So there has to be encouragement. You have to take time to take breaks, to catch your breath, get a drink of water, whatever it is, and you got to be sensitive to that. And I think as a consultant, you have to be sensitive of that with your clients because, I mean, look, I can do an ERP implementation. I can implement Acumatica. If I know everything that I need to know, I could probably configure Acumatica in about 3 weeks. Does that mean that my client's going to be successful? No, because I'm doing it by myself, right? And they're not going to have any idea what I did. So, we make it, a point to really involve them, but we also have to listen to them and understand, and be aware of areas of anxiety or stress or discomfort and address those as they pop up. Take the time to take a break, take the time to, understand their concerns or their fears or, you know, anything that's going to impede their progress because you need them to be successful.
Oh, makes sense. Yeah. So it's all what I'm hearing is it's almost like there's two types of things, two types of pain that you experience as you're climbing. One is the type of pain that you push through, which is like, hey, just keep making that next step, keep moving forward. And then the other type of pain is a pain that you shouldn't push through.
Right.
Would you say that was something on your mind, or that was something maybe more on the guide's mind in terms of, this guy just needs more encouragement, or this guy needs a rest?
Well, the guides, what's great about them is that, and actually it's a great question, Tim. I mean, to be honest with you, it's a great question. So I'm kind of thinking, the ascent and then the descent. And, I have a couple of stories on that. I mean, not really stories, but just, something to touch on. Um, During the ascent, we were finding ourselves like you'd walk 10 feet and you'd say, okay, I need to stop and catch my breath. I mean,
Interesting.
it is rarefied air. Okay. It is rarefied air up there. And they were great about it. It's like, hey, we can only go as fast as you can go. So yeah, we're cool. Just, whatever you need, they're there for you. Um, so there's that. But then, on the descent, is kind of tricky because I mean, Kilimanjaro is effectively a volcano, right? And so there's a lot of loose dirt, and when you're going down pretty quick when you're leaving the summit to get back to the base camp, which is at 15,000 feet. Um, and you've got your poles and whatnot, and they're kind of telling you it's like you sort of want to ski your way down in a way. You kind of want to use your poles as leverage to. And I kept slipping and falling, and I just wasn't keeping my balance very well. And so they were like, okay, let's check you out, right? Who am I? I can't remember the guys' names today, but they were great guys. What's your name? What's our names, and where are you, and who are you with, and what's your name, and what day is it? That kind of thing. And I was fine. I wasn't experiencing. I was just struggling to sort of keep my feet under me is really what it was. But those are the types of things. But they're looking for those clues. And so, and they're also like, if they also are saying, hey, listen, if you're feeling these various symptoms, we need to know about it so that we can help you. Okay. And so like if you're feeling like your breathing's a little wet, and I did actually experience a little bit after we got back to the base camp. I was beginning to notice a little wet breathing. They're like, we'll give you some ginger tea and we'll get you down to the bottom of the mountain, so that you can, so that you're going to be okay. So they are looking for those clues. And I think as ERP consultants, you should also be acutely aware of those clues. Like when clients are getting frustrated, you want to sort of take the time and say, okay, tell me about it. Let's get it on the table. Let's figure out what it is, and let's figure out how we can help you to get to the bottom of the mountain.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, like you made a point that you yourself could configure Acumatica probably in a few weeks for
Yeah.
someone,
Mhm.
and a guide could probably hike Kilimanjaro on their own, potentially. But their real skill there is not their ability to do it. Their real skill, it sounds like, is their ability to read who they're taking up,
Yeah.
and get them there successfully.
Yes, exactly, and just to be sensitive to it now, but they're also really good to remind you, slow down. They the pole pole as they say, pole pole, go slowly. You'll get there. Just but it's really important. It's really important to keep in mind, to do that properly. Um, Couple of other thoughts I had on this as well, just some other lessons. So first thing is actually kind of an interesting point talking about guides. You can't hike Kilimanjaro on your own. You have to hire a guide or
Oh, okay.
to do it. So yeah, they will not let you do that. Acumatica will not allow you to self-implement, right? They won't allow you. You got to buy it through a reseller, or you can have Acumatica, do the implementation for you if you so chose. like if the reseller doesn't have the resources or whatever to do it. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to take you to the top of the mountain, right? So and that's an interesting point, and sometimes that's kind of a point of contention. I've had clients in the past, or we've had customers, I should say, because I wouldn't necessarily consider them clients, where they were like have a extreme distrust of consultants. It's a bias, and it could be from a bad experience, but for whatever reason, they might have a distrust of consultants, and maybe because they feel like, oh well, they're going to take every opportunity to bill me for every billable hour that they can get their hands on, which really isn't in anybody's best interest, right? As a consultant, my primary goal is to make sure that the client's successful. I don't, the billing is, the money that you make from doing it is incidental to, it should be, kind of a byproduct of the success that you're giving to your client, right? Or helping your client to achieve, I should say. And so, and for those that try to do it on their own, I promise you, they're, unless they've got a lot of experience with it, they might not do very well. I would venture to guess that I'd probably be like the worst, the worst client for an ERP consultant, because it's like, oh yeah, I know this, I got this, I've done this a million times. Nobody wants that person either. And actually, the guides had a funny story about that too, because I asked them, what makes, in your mind, what type of client is likely to be most successful hiking to the top of Kilimanjaro?
Oh,
And they
interesting.
said, yeah, and they said, usually it's sort of like middle-aged, slightly out of shaped folks, not necessarily the most athletic,
Very interesting.
particularly like younger athletic guys, right? Testosterone filled dudes aren't going to be your best candidates necessarily. Okay. Now, and I don't want to paint too broad of a picture there, but they told the story about how they had this one guy who was, it was one guy and like three middle aged ladies. And the entire ascent, the guy's like, I bet I can beat you up there, and I bet that I can, he was really super, super cocky, and basically like, yeah, man, I'm gonna get up there, I'm gonna be one of the fastest guys that you've ever had up there. Long story short, he ended up suffering some kind of, altitude sickness, didn't make it to the top, but the three ladies did. So
Very interesting.
yeah. So, there is sort of like, yeah, you got to be physically fit, but don't mistake having, it doesn't matter what your cardiovascular health is necessarily. I mean, sure, you want to be healthy, right? You want to be able to, have a strong heart and good lungs and all that other stuff. I mean, that's important. Okay. However, having cardiovascular health isn't necessarily a guarantee that you're going to survive the trip, because you still have to acclimate. And there's no training that you can do, where most of us live in the world, that's going to help you to acclimate more quickly getting to the top of the mountain.
Very interesting. What you're reminding me of right now is, a friend who's a nurse, and he's made the comment before, when he gets sick, he needs a nurse to take care of him. and and the point I've taken away from that is that it's not about the knowledge. And it
Right.
sounds like a similar thing here. It's not about knowing how to get to the top. It's about needing to rely on others. Even if you were the guide yourself,
As well.
to your point, you're not allowed to climb it yourself. You need to rely on others. And it also reminds me of the Navy SEALs. I've heard that
Mm-hmm.
the Navy SEALs who are successful in becoming SEALs aren't the macho ones, similar to your story. They're the
Mm-hmm.
ones who are good at relying on others. It's the
Yeah.
team
Yeah.
aspect of it, right? And it sounds
Yeah.
like that's a big takeaway here. Is it takes a team to get to the top of Kilimanjaro. It takes a team to successfully implement an ERP system.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. Yeah. So a couple of things on that too. So, um, one thing I thought was interesting, kind of interesting. So one of the phases that you're actually probably one of the most important phases, honestly, with an ERP implementation is discovery, right? You probably agree with that. Where, for those of you who, I'm guessing anyone who's listening to this podcast probably has an interest in ERP, so they probably understand what we're talking about when we talk about discovery. Um, but when you're doing discovery, it's all about kind of getting the lay of the land, right? And also understanding, getting a sense as to who you're working with. And also, what I like to do as part of my discovery is it's not to let too many of my tricks and secrets out, but part of what I'm doing too is I'm kind of assessing their readiness, right? I'm taking the time to sort of like get a gauge of like, okay, do they have, what's their change management plan look like? And how prepared are they? And do they understand some of the concepts that, you know, we're talking about, as we're kind of going through this, and how are they using their system today? And how big of a paradigm shift is this going to be for them, for their operations? And that's going to include you into a lot. When we were getting ready to go to the night before we left for Kilimanjaro, our guide showed up at our B&B, and he had us take out all of our gear, right? All of our gear, and so that he could take stock as to what we had. Do we have enough warm weather clothes? Do we have do we have rain gear? Did we have, our gaiters and, all the things that you might need while you're up there? Gloves, glove liners, a head sock, anything along those lines, right? And actually, I'd forgotten to bring a water bladder. So they were like, okay, well, we got to get you a water bladder. You're gonna have to rent one. It's gonna fine. I just had a water bottle, and so and I think that discovery is really important because not only you're trying to understand their assessment, but you're also like saying, okay, well, where are the gaps? What are the things that you're wanting to accomplish that maybe our software might not have a solution for right away, right? And so you always want to undergo that kind of assessment, before you embark on, whether it's an ERP implementation or hiking the mountain. You want to make sure that you've taken the time to assess your readiness for it.
Interesting. And same thing there. It was someone else who did the assessment. It wasn't just you going down a checklist. It's important to have someone else because they were probably assessing not just your gear, they were probably also assessing you.
Right.
Although, not obviously, but they probably were, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it was also important too because if I'm being honest, I didn't go into that, and I didn't go into this journey um, with a lot of confidence, or I wasn't intrepid. I was pretty nervous about the whole thing. I was, and having had the opportunity to meet with the guide ahead of time and to kind of talk with him, and he took the time to sort of let us know what we could expect, which is also really important. I think in the ERP process, is to manage expectations and help them understand what they're going to go through, the good, bad, and the ugly, right? And it helped to sort of like, okay, I trust this guy, and I think that's also really important. You got to trust your guide, because otherwise, you might not want to go up the mountain at all, let alone, worry about whether or not you're going to make it.
And that guide, was that the first time you had met them? Like, did you just sign
Yeah.
up with a company and they assigned you a guide?
Yeah, so I mean, it was, Africa is kind of an interesting thing. If you ever, go down to Africa, there's a million options, in terms of how you're going to tour the continent and where you're going to go and whatnot. And so usually you're working with somebody to kind of, to pull it all together for you, right? And so we worked with somebody. They got a sense as to where we wanted to go. They found an operator and an Airbnb, and I think or not Airbnb, but B&B, place to stay. And I think there was the tour company. There was sort of a relationship there, and so that's kind of how it worked out.
Yeah, and that sounds pretty similar. I mean, people go to buy Acumatica and they deal with the sales side of things, and then they get handed off to the consultant, right? And it's
Right.
sort of this. A lot of times, that's a difficult transition because it's totally different team and uh, totally brand new relationship, and it's frustrating for them because they told all this stuff to the sales side and they expected it to all translate to the consultant side, and usually it doesn't. And I don't know if do you experience anything there that's a parallel.
Not so much there because the people that I mean, well, I guess the way that I would put it is that we really did have no contact with the guides prior to getting to the B&B, right? And and of course, the tour operator, or or yeah, I guess you would say the coordinator, there was no prior introduction or anything like that. We had no way of vetting, the guide in any way, shape, or form. Um, Sometimes in the sales cycle in ERP, you might have an opportunity to vet the consultants, but it rarely happens. And so it's not always, something that you'll see. So yeah, you're going to have an opportunity to, I mean, your only opportunity might be at the discovery, or maybe, before the discovery, during the kickoff, you might have a few minutes to talk with the client. But it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and sounds like your experience meeting the guide, it was helpful to meet the guide. You got established more trust. Were you
Mhm.
thinking at all, I should ask for another guide, or like, were you evaluating the guide, or were you just like, hey, I know this is who I've got, and this is who I'm going to stick with to get to
Yeah.
the top, right?
Yeah, I think that I think at that point, it was like, all bets are off. This is who you're going with.
Yeah, it
So
makes sense, and I think that's most people's experience with an ERP implementation. I mean, you don't have a choice. You've got who you
yeah,
got,
you get
and
assigned you get
yeah,
assigned who you get assigned to, and good, bad, or indifferent. I think the only difference is if you are an ERP consultant and for whatever reason you're not getting on with the client, or the client doesn't like you, or you don't like them, or whatever, it's a little easier to swap out an ERP consultant, just to get a different face in there than it would be to swap out a guide when you're halfway up the mountain. So, but I will say though that when you are halfway up the mountain, it's not really the best time to swap out guides. And I think the same could be true with an ERP consultant. There is certain tribal knowledge that you're carrying with you. And if you think about, let's just kind of take that to its logical conclusion. Let's say we're halfway up the mountain and I decide I don't like the guide anymore. Maybe he said something to offend me or whatever. What am I going to do at that point? You know, are we going to radio down and bring up, some other guide, and how long will I have to wait in order, for that guide to get up to where I am at that part of the mountain? Um, you know, I think the same could be said about an ERP solution. So you really do kind of have to establish kind of a bond and relationship with your guide or your consultant, to where you can, sort of work through that stuff, right? Because what choice do you have?
yeah, great point. I mean, you could essentially you're going back down the mountain, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
In
mean,
an
that would
ERP
be the
implementation,
alternative.
you're
Yeah.
in a sense you're recovering ground with a new consultant if you go that route.
Oh man, I
Yeah,
couldn't have said it better.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's almost like a new try at the mountain. You
Yeah.
didn't make it that first time, so yeah, you got to try again. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
interesting.
Now, interestingly, I mean, the success rates of ERP implementations are probably a little bit higher than hiking Kilimanjaro. However, I thought I saw a statistic not too long ago that said somewhere in the neighborhood about 80% of companies that do implement ERPs don't realize all of the benefits that they were hoping to get out of it. And there are a number of failures, and actually a lot of companies, to your point, that embark on ERP implementations oftentimes don't make it the first time.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a difference there, right? Because how you
Mhm.
define success in an ERP implementation
Right.
is much more of a gray area, right? In terms of, yeah, they might have gotten live on the system, but it wasn't as good as they thought it was going to be. And so I think that's why those statistics are so high. I think it's just the grass is greener nature, human nature. Whereas climbing a mountain, you can tell, did I get to the top or did I not? I know
Sure.
whether I did, right? Whereas ERP,
Sure.
it's a little more subjective. It was successful or not.
Right. Well, let's talk about getting to the top of the mountain. I wouldn't define getting to the top of the mountain success, right?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So getting to the top of Kilimanjaro, getting to Uhuro's Peak or Uhuro Peak, the dreaded 19,341 feet, that is not your goal. That's your waypoint. Your goal is to
Because if you
get back
die on the way
down
back
to the
down, it's not
yeah,
success.
your goal is to get back down to the mountain and get back to living your life, and getting back to a sense of normalcy, right? So, you think about an ERP implementation, going live is not your goal, right? And to go live, you know, at, at whatever cost it should never be your strategy. You know, you want to go live when you're ready to go live. Now it's important to pick a date, and you got to have a target. You got to have a time in which you're shooting for that's going to be this side of reasonable. But you don't want to rush it, and you don't want to think of it as that's our end game, because it's not. Going live is merely just a waypoint. You're that's when you switch over, but you're going to have a week, 2 weeks, a month, 3 months of a lot of bumps and bruises coming down the mountain, like I did when I was falling down, trying to get back down to the bottom, get back to the base camp, and I'm slipping and sliding on the dirt. There's going to be a lot of that with an ERP implementation, right? You're going to be live. You've made it to the pinnacle. Now you're trying to work your way back down. There's going to be bumps and bruises along the way. And what do we do when those happens? Well, we learn, right? but but at some point in time, you want that learning to be sort of a temporary thing, right? Where you get to a point where you become comfortable with the software enough to where, after a period of time that hopefully isn't too long, that you'll adapt, and you'll actually hopefully be more productive than you were prior to all of this. I
Great
kind of
point.
like to
Yeah.
think of it as having done it is, you maybe get a level of enlightenment, as kind of the end result of that, and maybe might look at the world a bit differently than you did before you embarked on the journey. And I think the same could be same about an ERP solution. Hopefully, if it's done properly, not only will you have learned something, but you might actually be better for it.
Tell me more about reaching the summit. Was it anticlimactic at all, or did you like? Was it everything you thought it would be?
I got to be honest with you. It was no, I wouldn't say that. I would say that it was by far the hardest thing I've ever had to do, and I would have to say that because there's basically three summit points. A lot of people think that there's one. There's actually three. There's Gilmore Point, or is it Gilman Point? Um, the other one, oh gosh, so Uhuro, Gilman's the first one, Stella's the second one, and then the Uhuro is the final one. And so, no, I mean, it's like you get to the top of the mountain, you think, oh, okay, we're at Gilmore, we're done. It's like, no, no, we got two more points that you got to get to. But it was the hardest thing. I wouldn't say it was anticlimactic at all. If anything, I was thinking, gosh, it'd be nice if we had a helicopter, or a zip line or something that would allow us to get down faster, because I'm exhausted and I know we can't stay here. So
But how long did you stay there? Like when you reached that third one, how long did you linger there before you kept moving?
maybe an hour or so. I
Oh,
mean,
that long. Okay.
maybe. Well, and I think we stayed longer than we should have done, and I think a lot of it was because we were really kind of struggling with, we were just tired, and there wasn't a lot of oxygen, so it's like every time you move a muscle, you're just like breathing, sucking in air as much as you can get, but we did take a break to kind of get a little bit of a snack, and kind of replenish and refresh a little bit. But yeah, we were probably there longer than we should have been. But that, I think that's atypical.
Interesting. So that is a great lesson that go live is not your end goal, and you need to not go live too soon because you need to be ready for what comes after go live. I mean, to me, that first month end close, if you're in accounting, or looking at the first month's numbers, if you're in operations, that comes after the go live. And my experience, that's normally where you experience more of the real problems. Like go live is
Oh,
in an ERP implementation, it's usually it's you're not sucking air, right? It's much quieter than you expect it to be, but it's after go live when stuff really starts to show up, right? Then
oh,
if
absolutely.
you're lucky, if you notice it soon enough.
Yeah, and here's a kind of an interesting one too. Kind of on that same vein. When we're talking about hiking to the top of the mountain at in the middle of the night. How many projects, Tim, have you worked on? And I know I can say it's been a few for myself, where you're up until midnight, 2, 4 in the morning, loading data.
Great point. Yeah. Yeah, that weekend, that go live weekend. Yeah, you're operating on not very much sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of one project that I did about a year ago where we were literally loading data until about 3 or 4 in the morning. We didn't get everything in that we wanted to, but we just basically the client said, look, we got a few things that we got to work out here. Go grab some sleep and come back in a few hours. Not come back in the afternoon, come back in a few hours when the crew gets here so that we can finish this up. So yeah, I've been there.
And so after you reached the summit, when you got back down to base camp, how was that night of sleep for you?
Oh my god. Got a massage, got a proper dinner, a couple of beers, slept like a baby. It was and was probably in bed pretty early, I think. So yeah, it was nice. And then there was the other side of the reward was a nice little stay over in Zanzibar, and rented a little hut on the beach of Zanzibar there. So that was nice. It was a nice reward to look forward to.
So take time to rest and recoup after going live on a new ERP system.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for
Plan a
sure.
vacation or
Have a
something.
have a carrot. Have a carrot there for for folks. Some kind of reward. I mean, have a party. Celebrate. Celebrate your successes. If you can, and make it so something that everybody can enjoy for sure. I mean, there's just so much, Tim. I mean, there's other things that we probably didn't talk about as it relates to that, but I mean, I think you kind of got the gist of it. I think there's a lot there to, where you can just go, yeah, that kind of fits, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's really cool. I love those type of analogies, and I guess this is more than an analogy. It's a series of analogies, right?
Mm.
I do want to ask you one other one. You alluded to it briefly earlier, but along the lines of how it changed you, or how uh, I guess I would say you got to the top of a mountain. Was that really it, or there was more to it? Like when someone implements a new ERP system, they're basically still doing the same stuff on their ERP system. But what's the point? What for your Kilimanjaro
Yeah.
experience? How did that benefit you to this day, kind of a thing?
Well, I think it was just the life experience, right? I think that there was something that was kind of enriching about it in a way that is not necessarily tangible, right? So first off, you're in Africa. Okay. And this was done, after about a week and a half of touring that side of the continent. So, we'd started in Nairobi, um, and went down to the Masamara Preserve, and spent, a bit of time there. Um, you got to watch a lot of animals there, and then you ended up in the Serengeti. Same story there, and it is a lot of driving, and the Maasai. I mean, just meeting the Maasai was in of itself was just kind of a trip. you know I mean, and you begin to see how like other cultures live, and the conditions in which they live, and the way that they celebrate life, and their customs and things of that nature. I mean, even if it's only tangential to your actual experience, you begin to see, you begin to appreciate other cultures, and to see how they live, and meeting, and the people, like the crew that we had, they were just lovely, beautiful, sweet people, that really only was really interested in just making sure that you're comfortable and happy, and just hospitable and kind, and I don't know how to really explain it in a way that would make sense. I don't want to sound preachy or anything along those lines, but it is something that you can only experience when you do something like that. It's and I think that having had that experience, and in the environment in which you're kind of operating in that situation, um, it is immersive in a way that I can't explain.
Your word tangential, makes me think of a parallel in that, in my opinion, a lot of times the real benefit that a company gets implementing a new ERP system has absolutely nothing to do with the software.
Yeah.
Something gets uncovered in the process that
Oh
they
God.
didn't
Yeah.
know about. And they could have just re-implemented the same exact software and had the same experience. It's the unpredictable, tangential nature of it. It uncovers something that they never thought of before just because of going through that experience.
Well, it's a great point, Tim, and I've said this before with clients, is that sometimes when you're implementing new software, or to your point, if you're even re-implementing the old software, I mean, any type of ERP implementation is going to shine a bright, shining light on areas of neglect, right? Or areas of inefficiency. Um, you can bet your money on it. You're always going to have a situation where you will come up enlightened in some way that you might not have done had you not undertaken the effort.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And uh, the software is almost just an excuse, right? You've got to buy a new piece of software to have that experience. Most people won't do it without that.
Yeah, maybe I don't know. Maybe it's a conduit. Maybe it's a catalyst. Really, kind of more to the point, right? But it does happen, and it does, and and I think the important thing to think about too when you're thinking about an ERP implementation and kind of having that enlightened experience is the fact that most ERP solutions, not just Acumatica but other platforms out there as well, they are they're created in the image of somebody's idea of what best practices ought to be, right? You know, there's there are some consultants out there that like change management consultants and whatnot, and they put a lot of emphasis on re-engineering processes before they even look at the software. Now, maybe, okay, maybe. I don't know that I agree with that. I think it is kind of a chicken and egg conversation, but but I also believe very strongly that you should do as best as you can to adapt to the software, because if you fight the software, you might not get as much out of it as if you rather than to take the time to learn it, understand it, and then tweak it in those areas where it's just not going to work for you. But sometimes it's a lot easier to change a process than it is to change the software.
Totally. Take what the mountain gives you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
thanks for taking the time to share that experience. There's a lot more parallels than I thought
Oh,
going
yeah.
into it. I really like it.
Yeah, and I think that I probably had like 50 other things that I wanted to say that we didn't get to, and maybe we could do a part two at some point. But no, Tim, it was a real pleasure and honor. I'm really, grateful for your inviting me to do this with you. It's something that I've been wanting to share with the world, whether or not they wanted it shared or not. Here it is. so, but it is. It was something that's been bouncing around my head for a long time, and it's just like one of those things that it's an itch that you just can't quite get to, And so it's a pleasure to share it with you, and I appreciate your being a receptive audience for it.
One of the most striking things to me is I just think it's funny. You're an ERP geek when you're having an experience like up in the middle of the night climbing Kilimanjaro, and what's going through your head.
I'm
This is
telling
similar
you,
to an implementation.
it's a mental illness. I admit to it. I kid with clients a lot, and other people that I know. It's like, yeah, my mind's like a bad neighborhood. You don't want to go there alone. Um, you know, so, um, so yeah, you're right. It is kind of a funny thing, but hey, I feel like it's a bit of a passion for me in a way. I enjoy the work a lot. It's hard, it's stressful, but it's interesting work, and it's something that I kind of think about all the time because how can you not? No two projects are the same. No two clients are the same. Even if they are in the same business, the same, they say that sell the same thing, make the same product, whatever, it's always different, and and I always come away with a project having learned something. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and I feel like it's not just it doesn't just shine the light that you're an ERP geek. It also shines the light that an ERP implementation is hard. The reason
Yes.
that came to you wasn't just because you're passionate about it. I think it also came to you because it is it is one of the difficult experiences that someone goes through in their career, at least, right? And I
Right.
remember talking to an Acumatica consultant years ago about he had been in the military. He talked about basic training and fighting in the military, and then he said, and then I got into this ERP consulting gig, and it's way harder. So it's difficult. It's difficult work going through an implementation.
It
So
is.
I don't think
It
you're
is.
weird for that it came up.
No, no, and no, I don't think so either. And we'll. I know we need to wrap up, but I'm gonna kind of say this. I think like with every ERP implementation, and I think it's the same for both the client and the consultant, is you're kind of drinking from a fire hose, and it's you're getting a lot of information thrown at you. You got to assimilate it. You got to figure out how that's going to work with what you're trying to with the problem that you're trying to solve and the tools that you're incorporating to solve those problems. It's an effort, and it is hard, and it does require a lot of thinking on your feet. You're expected to have the answers. You don't always have the answers. You feel bad when you don't have the answers, but gosh darn it, you're going to do everything you can to find that answer. But it is one of the most challenging jobs that I've ever had, and I don't know that I would have it any other way, honestly. Other than like just to say, okay, I'm done, and I'm just going to retire. You get to that point. So
So it's hard, but it's fulfilling.
it's fulfilling and rewarding for sure. And like I said, you're always going to learn something from it. And that's the thing that I like to take away. When I'm working with other consultants, is like, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot, and I've done projects where I went in and I knew nothing about their business, didn't understand it, didn't know how they did it, and somehow came up with a solution that we all liked and we're all proud of. So
That's fulfilling. Yeah, so it sounds good way to wrap it up. Climbing Kilimanjaro, hard experience but fulfilling. It sounds like you don't regret it, and hopefully it's a similar situation to those who implement an ERP system.
yeah, absolutely. Tim, it's been a real honor. Thank you so much for inviting me again for the fourth time.
Hey, thanks for coming, and thanks for sharing all those lessons learned. Sounds like we didn't get to all of them, but I think we got to a good amount of them, and great stuff. I
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
awesome, awesome. Be well.
All right, take care, man. Until
Yeah,
next time.
You bet. Yeah. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
All right, well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of ogforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening, and take care.